Hello and welcome to the Hurling Show this bright Monday morning. We've just seen a whirlwind. After 3 or 4 weeks of it, yep, Sharon is out of Love Island. It was devastating news for us all last night. What a weekend of hurling. I mean, some of the stuff we saw here, whether we talk about Limerick and their unbelievable win over Tipperary in the Munster final, that massive comeback, Kilkenny beating a COVID-hit Dublin, the qualifier stuff, Davy versus Laois, Waterford just sneaking past Laois, all the other tiers as well. Michael Verney, it was a breathless weekend.
Yeah, I was unreal, Shane. We've been saying it and teeing it up for the last couple of weeks. Like, I firmly believe that this could be like one of the great championship summers, and it is absolutely teed up for just everything over the weekend. Like, have you ever seen a game like it? Really, down in Cork yesterday, that a game could turn that quickly. And like, we know how good Limerick are, but you couldn't think that they were going to turn around and be 2 ahead at the second water break, having been 10 down at half time, and just so much to dissect and discuss from that game as well. It was just a super weekend, and Kilkenny doing what they do on Saturday as well, and Clare and Wexford, Davy loan, and maybe a possible reconciliation over the next while, who knows. But it was a weekend that really had everything, and like, there's not that much hurling to be played, but there's massive games ahead, and it was so good just to enjoy everything that happened over the weekend, and so many talking points, so much to discuss. I wouldn't be sure where to start, to be honest.
No, and this is before you even take into consideration that Clare have been drawn against Cork in the qualifiers this morning. Galway are up against Waterford. The games are going to be played next Saturday. The fixtures will be decided later today. Now, if Clare were to beat Cork, then they'd play Tipperary. It's just teed up for relentless hurling over the next few weeks. Get your comments in. There's loads of them flooding in already, and we'll certainly get to them. I mean, some of the things we were wondering is, after Kyle Hayes' goal, is there a more amazing individual goal in the history of hurling? Also, in terms of comebacks, I was there in 1996 when Tipper was at 10 points up against Limerick at half-time at the Gaelic grounds, and Gary Kirby took a knife to our chest. Now, it was a draw, and Limerick won the next day, but where else do the hurling comebacks rank? You'll obviously talk about Offaly beating Limerick, but we're sick of hearing about that one at this stage.
we definitely aren't. But that was kind of a 5-minute flurry at the end of the game. To be 10 down and to turn around that quickly is absolutely phenomenal. I think, like, Shane, as well, from playing games and being involved in games, when you're not on it and the other team is just running riot on you, how difficult it is to kind of halt that momentum mid-swing. It's so difficult. You'd be kind of thinking, geez, if we played them in another game in a week's time, it would be completely different. But to actually turn it around like they did, you'd be hard-pressed to find too many other examples. I suppose one of the main examples would be Limerick against Tip in the league a couple of years ago, where they turned around that big half-time deficit. I think Will O'Donoghue come on and got a goal, didn't he? And I had a hand in another goal, I think, too. And that's probably, like, that, as regards other comebacks like that, to come from that sort of a margin down, it's absolutely phenomenal, really. I have to say, though, Shane, I do think the writing was on the wall even before the start of the second half. If you look, how the game changed in the last 10 minutes of the first half. Jason Ford was getting loads of scores from play and popping into positions. All of a sudden, his scores from play kind of dried up. There weren't too many other scores coming. He hit, I think, 3 or 4 frees in the second quarter, and Limerick actually had a lot of chances in that second quarter. Tip had, very few in comparison to what they had in the first quarter. And obviously the changes then, Limerick made the changes, the 2 changes after 31 minutes. Like, Dan Morrissey came in and he never missed a beat. He was so solid at the back. I think something big that they did as well, I'm sure we get into it a bit more. Limerick obviously went long with the puckouts, but in general, once Morrissey came in, they stopped the ball. They stopped that initial ball. It didn't break through. It was breaking through before that. Morris's goal probably came as a result of that, and Bubbles' goal as well. But as comebacks go, they don't get much better.
Believe it or not, now, Tipperary created 17 chances in the first quarter, and Limerick only had 11. And Limerick were on target with 7 shots in a row. They missed their first 3, then their next 7 in a row. So they actually scored everything they hit just to keep in the game. Now, maybe they could have scored even more in that particular period, and Tipperary won some turnovers. And in like 60-40 situations, like brilliant turnovers. The work rate from Tipperary was absolutely unbelievable at the start. In the second quarter, Limerick created 12 chances, Tip created 11. So Tip were keeping with him. It's just Tip didn't quite go to town in the same way that they did. And Limerick missed 6 of their 8 chances just before coming into half time. So the tone was set a little bit. Now, Tipperary were still getting their scores, but there was a feeling of the tide turning a little bit. And I was tweeting during the game that I didn't think this was over. And obviously I wasn't working at this game, so I was watching it as a supporter. You know, I mean, you wouldn't be doing a show like this if you weren't into your hurling. So obviously you are going to support your county. But there was a feeling that Tipperary were kind of gasping for half time, just a little bit. And then like the way they came out at the start of that second half, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I really don't. Yeah. And there's a comment in here from Cathal O'Halloran. Only comeback that comes close would be Galway versus Kilkenny in the 2014 Leinster semi. 320 to 213. Galway down by 10 at 63 minutes. Galway came roaring back and ended all squared 5-16 to 322. Yeah, that
quick
was
quick one on that, Shane. We were overselling tickets for a Munster draw. Myself and Andrew Sullivan, who I'm sure is watching, and Burr were training that evening, so we had to leave with 10 minutes to go. And we were back at the car and driving back in through Tullamore. And all of a sudden, Galway fans were going back to their car and they were going absolutely ballistic. We were wondering, like, why aren't they depressed and like going home with their tail between their legs? And it was just the game had completely turned, and that was something that you wouldn't have expected. But that was more of a smash and grab at the finish. This was like completely turning the game at half time, and all of a sudden 20 minutes later they're in, you know, pole position. And just something you said there as well, how often do you see with other teams, how many other teams would have missed 6 of 8 chances before the break and still have been able to come roaring out in the second half? Most teams would have been deflated coming out in the second half, and that just shows where Limerick are at. And even you said it before, the amount of chances that they create, they will always have the chances to win games. Regardless of how bad things are going at any particular period of a game.
Yeah, to be down by 10 at half-time, level by the 51st minute, up by 7 on the 65th. Now, to be fair to Tipperary, they kept going and, you know, once or twice maybe tried to work a goal situation when they could have taken a point and Limerick went up the other end and got a score. But I think, like, in the overall scheme of things, right, if you think about it, the way we were looking at it last week, and you were enjoying piling the pressure on me about how would Tipperary go on this game, and you were doing the right thing. But in the heel of the hunt, we were all thinking, you know, Limerick probably have it won there going into the last 5 or 10 minutes, maybe win the game by 5 points. It was just in a manner that we could never have expected. And Jack Nulty has commented saying, Tip are not out of it yet. They've just questioned whether they have enough faith in their subs and need to time it a little bit better. I suppose that's a really difficult thing. How do you time facing against a hurricane? Because like when Limerick come like that, have Limerick done that to teams before? And just to mention that we're brought to you by orgaretro.com. And if you want to get a jersey like this, a cool retro Wexford jersey, go to orgaretro.com and put in the promo code OurGame. Where do you, have we seen this from Limerick before?
Not really. John Kiley said after it was the best, you know, quarter of his 5 years involved, basically. And I have to say it was a 110 to a point. And they had just the physical engagement everywhere. They were just in Tip's faces, and I think, you know the 80 or 90 yard ball that they were sending into the forward line when Galan wasn't on the field, ironically enough. They weren't really doing that thereafter, particularly in the second half. They were breaking the line. They were, really, really breaking the line, and there was more guys running off shoulders. They were refusing to sit back and strike. Everything was kind of go forward. What's that horrible rugby saying? Go forward ball. That's basically what Limerick were doing every chance they got. But it is really psychologically, I think, a phenomenal turnaround. And I have to say, Shane, the psychological scars for Tip must be huge. Whatever about playing anybody else, and they can beat anybody else. But if they play Limerick again, like, how can they believe that they're going to beat Limerick? They gave Limerick their best for a half, and were, beaten by, beaten by 5 in the wind up. But, you know, they could have been beaten by 10 or 15. And I would worry about the psychological scars for Tip going forward. Listen, maybe they can win in All-Ireland again, but I think that they're going to have to avoid Limerick to win All-Ireland. And I just think there's going to be serious damage done mentally to those guys, and if they have to come up against Limerick again, and they will come up against them over the coming years. Like, that's a real kidney punch to take, really, from Limerick yesterday when they were in pole position at the break.
Yeah, no, that's true. And, You have to acknowledge how brilliantly some of these Limerick players played. Like Nicky Quaid in the goals, always brilliant. Didn't have a chance for either goal. The half-back line really took over. In the first half, Tipperary had them all at sea. And like for the 2 goals came from long puck out and breaks. And it was straight down the middle. Big, long and ignorant, straight down the middle. And Tipperary won the breaks and obviously straight through for the goals. But during play, that area around the 45 where Declan Hannon likes to sit and maybe dropping back a bit further towards the D, himself and Barry Nash were kind of standing there, kind of holding their ground and holding position at times. And Tipperary weren't playing it there. They were playing it anywhere but where Limerick had extra numbers. And they were winning great ball. They were obviously winning ruck ball. But the way Limerick turned it around, like an awful lot of their players, like Gerard Hegarty had a terrible start to the game and a horrible first half. He kept going and eventually got himself 3 points. I think Tom Morrissey ended up with a nice few points from play. Keane Lynch, there was a man-marking job from Dan McCormick. Obviously did very, very well for long stretches. But ultimately, with the tide completely turning the other way, Keane Lynch eventually got on some ball and did really well. Seamus Flanagan 1-3. I think you could, like Paddy Maher, we wondered how he would go in this game, and just with the way teams are trying to expose or isolate him in massive area with good ball. Thought he did very, very well under massive pressure. But a lot of that Tipperary team just eventually capitulated. Like Peter Casey, he took over. He got 5 points. Aaron Galan came on. He got himself, I think, 6 points. 3 of those were frees. Yeah. I mean, just run through the subs there. Galan coming in. Dan Morrissey, David Reid, Boylan, Pat Ryan, Robbie Hanley. There's a lot of energy there. A lot of lads who are physically unbelievably well filled out. And for Tipperary, there are questions about, Jack Nulty mentioned it there in a comment about using the bench. And, Mark Keogh came on, scored a goal for himself, but got on the ball constantly when he came on. And I think for Tipperary, he had a bit of a nightmare last year when he came in when he started in the Munster semi-final beatdown against Limerick. But he came in here, and the only thing I'd like to change about him is instead of trying to control the ball with the stick every time it comes to him, just get your hand on the ball. Because you're obviously taking out, there's less room for mistakes if you just catch the ball straight away. But not everything came off for him. But he slammed the ball into the top corner of the net. That's obviously great for confidence. And he was just constantly getting on the ball or getting close to the ball, which is something that the Tipperary players just wasn't happening for the second half. Like you have 3 or 4 lads there who are over 30 years of age. And is it any wonder in that heat against that level of athleticism that it's going to fade out eventually? So, like, that was one of the best halves of Tipperary hurling in a long time.
Yeah.
So it was unbelievable. So Liam Sheedy got that spot on. But the second half is one of the worst that we've ever seen from Tipperary. That was a massive capitulation. And there's actually nobody really to blame in terms of like midway, like the second half starts. You say Liam Sheedy's got everything right in the first half, put out the same team for the second half. I don't think anyone would have changed a thing going out into the start of the second half, playing personnel wise, would they?
No, you couldn't have had. No, and you can't. Whatever about maybe 10 minutes into the second half where you might have sensed something or been, but you couldn't change it at half time, really.
So, what do you blame? What do you say? You could have done this, that, and the other. Like, it was such a total systems meltdown from Tipperary, which, look, is caused by Limerick being so unbelievable. So I'm not.
That's the caveat to it. Yeah. In fairness, yeah.
But like, in terms of like where Sheedy goes from here with the team and the coaching staff. I mean, what would you change? It's not like, you should have, from Limerick point of view, you should have started Galan, so that's pretty obvious. He made a mistake. And like you can say, well, they won the game, so how did he make a mistake? Do you think his plan was to go 10 points behind? I don't think so. So he made a mistake not starting Aaron Galan, and maybe Dan Morrissey too.
Kylie didn't admit that after. He also said he said he made the right move by not starting him, and that was proven. But he had a bit between his teeth, yeah.
Yeah, but you see, he has to defend his players, and he has to make sure that Graham Mulcahy doesn't take a knock over the fact that he was started and it didn't quite work out. And I don't know, was Mulcahy any worse than anyone else? But just somebody had to come off, and
he was very quiet, Jen, by his standards. Now he was very quiet. Don't know if he felt the weight of the ball. Actually, but honest, I don't think he did. I didn't. I watched it back again this morning, and I didn't notice if he did. But in fairness, what you're saying there, it is definitely a combination of Tip dropping their standards and not being able to maintain that energy, and all of a sudden, the Limerick kind of juggernaut just kind of steamrolling them, really. It was interesting. Brendan Cummins said this morning, which I thought was interesting, he just said Liam Sheedy needs to follow Brian Cody's lead by using young guys early and keeping old heads to finish the job, which is an interesting one. I think Mark Yo definitely did himself no harm. Jake Morris at different stages yesterday was really, really good and really took the game to Limerick and got a great score when the tide had completely turned. Even Paddy Cadell came in and done some good things as well. But it's like they learned on the job, some of those guys, in the most difficult circumstances. So they're probably, some of those younger players are probably a lot better versed to come in at that level now and maybe nail down starting positions. But he turned it around in 2010 when they were, well beaten by Cork. He turned it around in 2019 when they were well beaten by the same opposition. He's got a bit of a job in his hands to turn it around again. He doesn't have 5 weeks like he had in 2010, 5 or 6 weeks. He has 2 weeks. And they are going to be seriously deflated, both mentally and physically, after that, because they couldn't have done anything more in the first half. And then all of a sudden, the script was completely ripped up 20 minutes later.
Yeah, because just the players sort of, I think it was. But you've been in a game too where you're 10 points up and you switch off. But I don't think this was switching off. I don't think so. Limerick just coming like a force of nature. So the substitutes that came in for Tipperary, Willie Connors came on, got a point, did all right. Mark Yo, I thought very good. Niall O'Mara came in. So in the heel of the hunt, only 3 substitutes used. Well, Brian McGrath came in as well. Sorry, the report I'm looking at doesn't have Brian McGrath named there as well. And also Cadell. So actually all 5 substitutes. So
it's a poor report.
Go
to independent.ie if you want a proper match report.
And so I'm wondering then, you're talking about kind of bringing in some of the younger lads and using the panel, and obviously Dublin have kind of laid the blueprint in terms of having finishers and bringing on Kevin McManaman, and he's been crucial to winning All-Irelands. But the flip side is, would you be in a position to win the game or at least be neck and neck going into the last 15 if you didn't start all those other key lads? Because in the first half, it was some of the best performances we've ever seen from some of the Tipperary players and some of the older players in there too. But when you come away from the game, I think, who are the lads that are now kind of running the show for Tipperary going forward based on that game? And you'd say Jake Morris, Jason Ford. I think Alan Flynn was all right. Obviously, like everybody, faded in the second half. Cathal Barrett obviously still has a big part to play. Ronan Maher. And then
Dan McCormick is massive as well.
Dan McCormick, obviously. Yeah.
He was brilliant in the first half. Lynch was able to go to another level because guys around him were gone to another level. And all of a sudden there was way more space for him than there had been in the first half.
Yeah. And then so I'm thinking of all these younger guys, and Cadell, who I've been championing for a long time, and will it be a case that they'll now throw him in from the start? Or do Tipperary say, well, what we'll do is build on the first half? And this is the thing we've talked about before, is Liam Sheedy going to continue to keep faith in the players that have done it for him, going back to even minor days in 2006 or 7, that type of era, or what way is he going to go? But one thing that has to be said is, what is different about Tipperary in this match versus last winter when Tipperary got beaten well and from the get-go? Well, Dan McCormick started, Bubbles started, Michael Breen started, Seamus Kennedy started, Barry Heffernan was fit for this game, so was Paddy Maher. They both had injuries that day. Barry Hogan was in goals. So it was a pretty different proposition. For Limerick, is very close to the same sort of game. And do you think Kyle, again, Sheedy got a lot right. Putting Michael Breen on Kyle Hayes worked really well. And the one time he wasn't on Kyle Hayes' shoulder, it ended up with that goal. So the Jack McCaffrey of hurling, you need to keep tabs on him at all times.
Yeah, and in fairness, I felt sorry for Dan McCormick because he chased him every bit of the way. And in fairness, Hayes didn't really get away from him, and he had the hurling for the hook, and all of a sudden, this brilliant this brilliant overhand strike that there was really nothing he could do about it. It has to be said, Shane, I have to bring up the Galan incident on Cathal Barrett, and rather than you bringing it up, and people maybe saying there's some sort of bias, I don't think there's any bias in it. He struck back on him and deserved to be shown a red card. I think it was Patrick Hickey had tweeted me, and I think Michael Dignan and maybe yourself, saying that who was Dignan to say something deserves a red when he pulled that stroke across David Ford in 98. But in fairness, times have changed a small bit, and even Michael would admit that was a red card. But Galan definitely swung back, and it was nasty enough. Looking back on it again this morning, I did see Barrett actually swinging into him just before that as well, after the free was pulled. But Galan's was nasty enough, and you have to wonder, the game would not have went the same way if Limerick were down to 14 men and they were missing a player who come in and was really, really lively and had gotten a score, having just come in off the bench. So, like, that was a big game changer. The Seamus Flanagan tackle on Paddy Maher was bad as well. It was a bad, really bad tackle, and you could, potentially warrant a red card also as well. Now, we will say this, in fairness to Pod Dwyer, I thought he refereed the game like very well outside of that, and I thought he let things flow. And I think there was a trend with him and Fergal Horgan and a few others this weekend where they are trying to let the game flow. The advantage rule has been ripped up and needs to be actually taken out of the rule book for next year's Congress, because any referee worth his salt is not basically enforced now. But has to be said, the Galan incident on Barrett was a game changer.
Yeah, at that point the scoreline was it was still 2-16 to 12 points. It was only the start of the second half. He had won a free very well off Cathal Barrett, and then the free was overturned. It was a throw ball. And you know what's funny? Tipperary went straight up the other end, and Jake Morris had a half chance for a goal. And remember, he pulled on it one-handed. And such is the skill of that young lad that you just never know. That could have ended up in the net, and then you're looking at a 13-point deficit, and maybe just psychologically that's a massive blow. Look, it was a red card tackle. There's no two ways about it. You can call me a Tipperary biased man if you like, but that was a definite red card.
Shane, there's no bias in that. Anybody, like Limerick people will even admit that was a red card. He lashed out, and how it goes from being a free to being a yellow card, if they know it was a striking offence, like, and they obviously do, the yellow card doesn't come into it.
As Leisha Man says there, Shane looks seriously upset. Andrew Sullivan, if Galan hit any other tip defender, he'd have been off. Now, this was a conversation beforehand, whether Galan or whether Barrett gets refereed differently. Just to jump onto the Seamus Flanagan one, the game was done at that stage, and Paddy Maher was running out with the ball, and it was like, you often see this in tackles. A good way, rather than trying to grab onto a lad to stop him getting past you and pushing him back, a good way of doing it without the ref seeing you pull the jersey is grab the hurley either side and push a lad like that, right? So that means you'll never see the jersey being pulled. It's kind of a bit more of a dunt, and the referee tends to let it go. And I think a couple of the red card incidents that weren't red cards in recent times have been exactly that. So Gerard Hegarty did that to Ger Millerick in the Munster semi-final, and this was the same thing from Flanagan here. And when you are 6'3", 6'4", as these lads are, and maybe even more, the chances of it going wrong, they're just that little bit higher. So in rugby, you see when a lad comes in with a clothesline tackle and it hits there, fine, it's let go. But when it comes up a little bit further, there might have been the right intention to hit them there. But if you time it anyway wrong, then it should be a red card. So that was a red card as well. Noel Carroll adds in, I hope you're going to give Laois some kudos today, Shane, for their performance against Waterford, as you never done a reaction on Saturday. The most improved hurling county in the last 2 years. Well, the two games were on at the same time, and I had to go off to the Joe McDonagh. But certainly we will be giving Laois credit for that performance. Brian Timmins added, I think Barrett Flake and Galan beforehand meant the ref didn't dish the red.
Yeah, well, now I only saw that, having looked back at the incident 4 or 5 times. He did actually kind of pull across him a bit as well. But that was more on the ball. Barrett hit him 4 times before Galan hit him back, says Dermot O'Connell. Not so sure about that, but there's no doubt about it. That was a red card, and it totally changed the game. Like if Tip would have are so well versed at closing out a game with an extra man, they would have just been able to sit back, pick points from range, and probably would have won by 7 or 8, I'd imagine, if they had 15
got all
or
the
14.
luck against Clare, like with this decision, and maybe it counted against Tipperary on this occasion. But none of this is to take away from Limerick. Like, you go through that team, what a team.
Freaks, Shane. They really are. Like, when you look at Hayes' goal, like, that's just the sidestep inside was just beautiful to open up the space. And like hitting the ball on the ground back into his hand twice. The second time needlessly, because he'd only had the ball in his hand once. But just unbelievable, really. And that was the big conversation beforehand. We were saying, Shane, will Tip be able to keep it pucked out to Limerick physically? That's the thing. And those guys are nearly all in their prime. One thing I will say, though, is particularly for the 2 goals, and when he was putting the back foot, Declan Hannon definitely looked a bit susceptible. He was brilliant on the ball, but he looked even a bit jaded the couple of the times he was beaten and put on the back foot for the 2 goals. So I'm sure that's something other teams will go after later on in the season. But Just a phenomenal physical performance. For Cian Lynch to be doing what he was doing, in the 73rd or 4th minute, he was doing it the same as he was in the 1st and 2nd minute. And him, Will O'Donoghue, Hayes, Dermot Byrne, Sean Finn, a lot of these guys are athletic freaks as well.
We did that conversation about the top 10 hurlers a while back, and I wonder, does Kyle Hayes' goal put him in the conversation, or do we say that, well, you know what, Michael Breen did a brilliant job in him for the most part, and what you saw was one of the greatest goals of all time in hurling, not necessarily one of the greatest performances?
Yeah, I think, well, Hayes was always going to be in the conversation anyway. I think you probably nearly have to wait till the end of the season. You don't even making snap judgments just based on one score. Hayes was good yesterday.
No, he was good, yeah.
He wasn't unbelievable. He scored an unbelievable goal though. So I'm kind of reticent to just react to one goal and put someone in here. I know it's funny actually, Shane, because I was chatting to Martin Brettany at half-time in Croke Park yesterday, and he said to me, go back to your Irish Independent preview magazine and look at who predicted would win Munster. He had tipped to win Munster, and I was back onto him 20 minutes into the second half. He said, you're not going to say anything now, you're going to be pretty quiet now. Just amazing how it had turned. But it was a phenomenal game, and it's really pleasing and satisfying for all these people that were giving out about hurling as well. Hurling is the best game in the world, bar none. And as the weeks go on, it's getting better and better.
So we're throwing it into all those detractors. That's what you're saying.
Well, people, that's overreaction as well, Shane, because of a couple of league games with peculiar rules and rules being administered that shouldn't be there in the first place. So no, you couldn't have it. People love to say, there's people just love jumping on bandwagons. Too many scores, whatever. I do agree that the ball is a bit too light or whatever. But people just go mad and wanting all these rules and different things put in place. Hurling is, in pretty good shape the way it is. There's no need for any radical change. Just keep it as it was over the weekend.
Yeah, keep your comments coming in here. Brought to you by orgaretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame. You'll get 15% off the class jerseys like this Wexford one here. And if you have any comments, definitely get them in, whether it's to do with Michael Verney's wallpaper, his medals for set dancing above his head, whatever it is.
They're my sister's medals. I never did Irish dancing. I wish I had because I would have had better footwork, I'd say.
So Michael Lucy's going to sew it into me, Shane, with a couple of exclamation marks, and give it out about the ref. You're forgetting how the ref gave everything to Tip in the first half. The goal was disallowed and was a clear goal. Hayes been pulled down and refs gives free out. No, I
disagree about the Hayes thing. I think Hayes dropped his arm and pulled him down, being honest with you. And
yeah,
I don't think you were giving out about the referee either. I don't think you were giving out about the referee. You're just stating kind of what you believe is fact.
And look, they analysed it on TV. I mean, that Seamus Flanagan was a square ball. He also, I think, did he pull at the face mask of Barry Hogan or flick the Hurley in or something like that? I'm not saying it in a red card sort of way. Obviously not.
You're not supposed to be able to face a person on a high ball either, Shane. So, if you're in goals here and I'm facing you, I'm not supposed to be able to face you going in because it's actually dangerous play. You're supposed to. That's why you back in and flick the ball. So I think that's partly why he was blown as well.
Yeah, do you know, it was funny, at half-time of the match on RT, Henry Shefflin said that Tipperary would be okay, get 10 points in the second half and you'd be fine. Now, 10 points would have actually only been enough to level the game. Tipperary scored 1-5 in the second half. Sorry, it wouldn't have been enough to win the game. Tipperary scoring just 1-5 in the second half, creating just 14 chances to Limerick's 30. I mean, just the level that Limerick got to, is that a one-off getting to that level of performance? I mean, you keep wondering where this trajectory for Limerick can go. But can this sort of thing be repeated against arguably the number 2 country, our team in the country?
Yeah, well, as I was saying earlier, Kaidi is saying it's the best quarter that he's had under his reign. If they're able to produce that for even a half against anyone, it was really a quarter. It wasn't a full half, really. It wasn't the best second half of hurling. Heard Jackie Tyrrell saying last night in the Sunday game that it was the best second half of hurling, or best half of hurling he'd seen. I don't even think it was a half. But how encouraging is that for Limerick, and how discouraging is it for everybody else that potentially they are now hitting new heights? Because that's what they hit yesterday. That was the best that we've seen Limerick over a period of time. And if they're able to maintain that for even a half, 40 minutes, they'll be blowing teams out of the water in this championship.
Yeah, okay, we'll keep getting your comments in there. There's plenty more to talk about in relation to Limerick's brilliant 3 in a row First time they've won 3 in a row since the 1930s. First time any team has done it since the late 1980s. So they really are an unbelievable team. Full value for their win. And if any other team comes up against that at Croke Park or wherever it be for the rest of the season, well, God love you. And they are directly into an All-Ireland semi-final. Actually, just a little point here from Luke Toomey. Galan, an unused sub in 2014 minor All-Ireland, to being Limerick's main man up front. Some amount of hard work put in by that man. No doubt there has been. And Seamus Flanagan, when he was on the All-Ireland winning squad for the under-21s, but was it 5 years ago now, he was a substitute, and he goes from that to being a guy who, scores 1-3 in a Munster final, starting All-Ireland final, has just been such a huge, massive cog in this team. So, I mean, that is a testament to some of the players in this Limerick team. The group development, but the personal development of all these players just speaks volumes about that group.
Yeah, no, it's savage. They obviously, the systems are in place for them to flourish, particularly at senior level, because that's what everything is built towards. But the individuals have to go and do the work, and those players you've mentioned there, particularly Galan and Flanagan, have clearly gone and done that work. And there was a score yesterday. Galan got off his right hand side about 50 yards out, where Barrett was literally in his face. He was right in on top of him, and he just gives a little flick off the right hand side. Not even his stronger side. Just some phenomenal scores yesterday. And that's just for anybody watching. So I think it was Hurling 365 had it up on Twitter. They had skills that Keane Lynch did about 6 or 7 years ago, a skills video, and he literally has been doing that since he was a kid, and he's able to go out and do it on the biggest occasion. Just a quick one for you as well, Shane. That's the best Munster final in how long? As well, that's the best Munster final in a long, long time.
Well, it felt like it had more riding on it than recent years, because for Tipperary, this was to get back in the conversation. We'd done the power rankings, and we'll do a new one again. But we'd had Tipperary dropping down a little bit. I mean, obviously, I was kicking and screaming with Tipperary going down as you were insisting on it, and obviously a lot of the comments coming in from the people who were watching the live show at the time. But for Tipperary, this was look. We're still back in this conversation, and in Championship with big teams, they never want to lose a final. Like Kilkenny would never want to lose a final. Cork would never want. Look, none of these teams would ever want to lose a final. So it just felt like there was so much kind of at stake here. And the other thing about this Limerick and having such an unbelievable group, it's not like they haven't had their off-field issues. We know about the New York thing. We know about another court case for another player at another stage. And still in all, nothing seems to ruffle what they do on the field. They still continue to build and go in that direction. Like, it's where would you see debate of it?
And even just Shane, John Kiley was talking about after the game, there was obviously a death in the Kildimo Palace Kenry club as well, and Kyle Hayes was able to go and produce that despite losing one of his clubmates and someone he was very close with. And I think Darren O'Connell is on the panel as well, the same. Those guys are just able to produce it week after week, and they're gonna be like the question marks. There was question marks after the Cork game. There's an awful lot less question marks now, and there's just questions for everybody else really, because they're a phenomenal side, and they're heavy odds on favourites now at this stage to be winning back to back for the first time in their history.
Yeah, and just Tipperary couldn't keep winning those breaks. Like in the first half, the amount of turnover ball they won and got scores off directly was incredible. And in the second half, just Limerick just started to win all those breaks. You saw Tipperary then just wondered what we even do with the puckouts. Like Barry Hogan, where could he go with it? Like in the first half, he was dropping them on the 21. Then he was, hitting ones to Paddy Maher. Understandably, would probably be very tired. And one or two, he hit a eye. And then, Brendan Maher got turned over for another. That was the one with the goal. And, it just started to just come apart at the seams. But anyway, for Limerick, it just shows the power that they have across the panel. It's unbelievable. For Tipperary, I do wonder what Sheedy will do next. Do you change that team, or do you think we'll go with plan A and we'll make plan A better? Because I don't know. I just think it's not like at the start of the second half, he's like, well, Limerick have created 15 chances here and we've created 4 and we haven't scored, or we got 1 point from Jake Morris in the first. God almighty. Between half-time and the 58th minute, Tipperary got 1 score. Yeah, but he wasn't just going to bring 5 lads off, or 5 lads in 5 minutes into the second half. I honestly think it's like Tipperary's big players. Yeah, they completely were out of it in the second half in a way that they were lording it in the first half. But it's very hard to single anybody out. That is the big problem with this.
That's the thing, you see. It's, as you said earlier, it is kind of a system failure. It's a system failure, and I suppose on the opposite side of it, it's Limerick just open it completely, and I suppose solving the puzzle that Tip made for them in the first half. They had it solved by half time, and they were even before half time. I would say probably from the 30th minute onwards. And yeah, it's very hard to single out any one player and say, oh, he made a mistake here or he wasn't up to it here. It's more of a collective, and that's probably the biggest worry of them all. I do think say Mark Keogh and even Paddy Cadell, a couple of these younger fellas have actually gone and done it now to some extent. They've gone and done it against the best of the best. So I do
Which
think
is something we wanted. I wanted as a Tipperary person. I want to see these lads blooded. I'd rather lose with the younger lads and still have the older lads involved. But those players are the future for the next 10 years, so they need to be given their chance. And they've been out there now. We can see exactly what different types of players at different age groups can produce, and they all have something to offer. But it's kind of rejigging where they fit in the puzzle at this stage. We'll move on to the Leinster final now. What a game this was, in the sense of the occasion around it. And just a reminder, we're brought to you by orgaretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame to get 10% off. If you want to get the audio podcast of this, go to patreon.com/OurGame, $5 a month there. But just to look at the scoreline, Kilkenny won 125 to 19 points against Dublin. But the big story of the game, other than the fact that it's the 73rd Leinster title for Kilkenny, 17th title as manager for Brian Cody, back-to-back for the Cats. Dublin were hit by 4 COVID absentees early in the morning. There was a positive case. There was close contacts. It robbed them of 4 players. 2 of them are starters. Ronan Hayes, the full forward, the main man, I'd say the target man, Cian O'Callaghan, who in my mind was down for, probably would have had a man-marking job on Owen Cody. And then obviously a couple of lads taken off the bench, Oisin O'Rourke, and I just have to double check who the other player was. Fergal Whiteley, yeah. It was Fergal Whiteley. After 3 minutes, Owen O'Donnell, the full-back, comes off. At half-time, Mark Schutte has to come off injured. I mean, Dublin just ran out of options. But Kilkenny were brilliant, and they cut them open as the game went on.
Just a quick one, Shannon. I was wondering, how do you deal with something like this as a manager? Whatever about, losing a player.
Nightmare.
Losing a player to, sickness, the night before, or the morning of a match, he rings and says, I'm in awful bother here. But losing 4 players, 2 starters, 2 guys that were probably going to come in as well. Really, really difficult one. Really, really difficult one to deal with for Matty Kenny. And in fairness, Dublin showed a lot in those players' absences, and even losing O'Donnell and losing Mark Schutte, as you say as well, just kind of probably faded after the hour mark, just didn't have much left. That's probably, it's partly to do with Kilkenny and Kilkenny's kind of relentlessness, but it's also partly to do with just maybe not having those same options that they would have had they had everyone available. But just, I was thinking there as we were talking, as weekends go, it doesn't get much worse for you. Tip losing the Munster final, Kilkenny win the Leinster final and beating your adopted Dublin. It doesn't get much worse than that.
Jeez, you love sewing it into me, don't you? For Dublin, they were only 12 points to 15 behind after 45 minutes. And a lot of the players were motoring pretty well. Danny Sutcliffe was having a really good game. James Maher, who I would eventually give man of the match to for scoring 3 points from wing back, whereas Sutcliffe scored 2 from wing forward. Sutcliffe was on fire. This was 2013 form. And do you know the way we kept talking about his 2013 form for the last couple of years, saying, can he get to that form? He actually did do it. Yeah. And kind of against the odds. Now, ultimately, his man did win the tussle here. But that's because Kilkenny took over across the board. But you trying to analyse how did one of the Tipperary forwards play in that second half against Limerick. But sure, how can you rate any of them really when it's such a, you've just been taken apart as a team. It's really difficult to do that. In the first half, I thought Dublin dealt with all of these blows. Imagine what the blow was like in a dressing room. They had to text the group. I mean, this is what Matty said in the press conference afterwards. They had to text the player group and let them know what was after happening. And then everyone had to try and get their head around it. And then 3 minutes into the game, Owen O'Donnell, the best full-back in the country, arguably your best player overall, has to come off. And you have to rejig the team. And Andrew Dunphy has to come in. And he does very well. And the backs were brilliant. They were brilliant. To be honest,
Paddy Smith, I thought, was outstanding in particular.
The job he did on TJ Reid. I mean, and last week when we were previewing it, I said, I don't think Smith will be on him because I'm not sure he'll be able to handle him in the air. like he did brilliantly. He spoiled TJ Reid for a lot of this game. Reid ended up with just a point from play, 110 overall. But the 1-9 of that was from frees. But the big story for me, again, was the bench of Kilkenny. The last day against Wexford, they came on to score 1-8. Obviously, that went to extra time. But some of the guys who came in this time also did the job. Michael Carey, chip off the old DJ Carey block. He came in, showed pace at times. And this is the whole thing. Dublin, with their weakened panel and team, they were fading. Like lads who were going to come off the bench had to start. Lads who may not have come on or come on the last 5 minutes came on early. Whereas Michael Carey came on in that ridiculous pace. I think Enda McAvoy, the great hurling writer, he had put out where did that pace come from or something like that. And Michael Carey did a quote tweet saying the mother, obviously taking the mick out of the father. But like he was really good, made an impact. Still a bit raw, but like you can see huge potential in that player. He's going to be very good. Killian Buckley came on, got a point. James Bergen got 2. Alan Murphy, he got 2. And also won a penalty. So in a game that was decided by 9 points, your bench delivered 6 points and won a penalty. It doesn't get more night and day than that.
No, what was it? 1-8 the last day against Wexford, 6 points in a Leinster final, in a really, really tight kind of Leinster final as well. I think a couple of things there. I thought, the full back line, which we've had questions over. Thought Paddy Deegan was brilliant again. Hugh Lawler was outstanding too, and Tommy Walsh bursted out with ball. Him and Cian Boland had a good battle there, but I'd say Tommy Walsh probably got the nod on it. James Matter's a really interesting one. Like how many players you can count on one hand the amount of players that Cody has dropped and then recalled. I think Willie O'Dwyer would be one. Mark Bergen is another one that springs to mind. But if anybody can think of any more, like they're a rarity really. And I tell you exactly why he was called back, because he has that athleticism that few other Kilkenny players have, that where they could match Sutcliffe like that and eventually dominate him at the end of the game and even hurt him on the scoreboard. And we've talked about it. It's amazing how hurling has changed. He was able to do as much damage on the scoreboard from wing back as he would from wing forward, probably more the other day, and he was absolutely outstanding. And by the end of it, he probably had Sutcliffe's heart broke, even though that battle was nip and tuck nearly the whole way. But yeah, it's amazing. 17th Leinster title for Brian Cody. It's amazing, really. It really, really is. Back-to-back titles, and they're only 2 steps away from an All-Ireland, or 2 steps away from Lee McCarthy now.
Yeah, interesting one here. So the penalty that was won by Alan Murphy and Jake Malone got a black card sin bin for 2. Penalty seemed a bit harsh on Dublin, in my opinion, says Derek Halpin.
I disagree now. I have to say he wrapped the 2 arms around him and looked to drag him to the ground. Well,
I don't think he dragged him all the way to the ground, because Jake would have had to be on the ground himself to do it, to also fall down the ground. I mean, look, obviously
he encouraged him to go to the ground.
He did. Look, it was a penalty. Look, I've got skin in the game. Jake is a clubmate. And what a great little fella he is. Well, he's not little. What a great fella he is.
Little fella.
Yeah, and that's going to end up in the cooler WhatsApp group. But anyway, I have to accept that. But I thought it was a little bit harsh, especially the double whammy. And this comes back to the decision a few weeks ago, Jake Morris. And fine, it was a penalty. It was a free for Tipperary. Aidan McCarthy probably deserved something equivalent to a black card. But for the triple whammy, he's now on a yellow, so close to a red. It's a penalty. And obviously he has to go off for 10 minutes as well. Like, that was a huge one.
It's too severe, and it's just too harsh. It changes the game fundamentally. It changes way too much. There's no need. The penalty is enough of a punishment, and increasing the area within which a penalty can be called is enough of a punishment.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's over egging the pudding with all these rules, and I don't think they think of the unintended consequences. It was 22 points to 15 at that stage. And it just ended the game as a contest. And actually, Donald Farrell makes a great point here in one of his comments, and get your comments in, please. Colin Fennelly must be kicking himself now. With the new sin bin rule, he could have had a few of those in every game. This is the thing, he's obviously opted out for this season. But
him and Shane O'Donnell, I reckon, are the most foulable players in hurling. And he would have absolutely went to town. He would have just drawn penalties and drawn sin bins.
See that question there from Michael Lucy. Lads, what do you think of Dublin chances through the qualifiers? Is there more in them now? Any chance? Well, they need everybody back. That's one thing for sure. And they're going to be in an All-Ireland quarter-final in 2 weeks' time. Obviously, a couple of days short of 2 weeks' time. And they'll only have those 4 players back in for training. This was Matty Kenny's understanding of it in the post-match press conference. during the middle of the week heading into that game. So their preparation is going to be stunted. So if I'm Ronan Hayes and I'm Cian O'Callaghan, I can go away and do a bit on my own. But it's not really the same. How is that preparation for an All-Ireland quarter-final? And by the way, even for the likes of Ronan Hayes and Cian O'Callaghan, I think that was his first Leinster final. I don't think he was on the panel. I think he was just in and around the panel in 2014. I might have to double check. Somebody might even correct us with a comment there. I'm not sure he played. It would certainly be Ronan Hayes' first Leinster final. And to lose out in this manner, I mean, obviously the public health advice is what it is, and people have different opinions on how things have been dealt with and all that kind of stuff. But it did occur to me, and obviously there was a tragic situation in Monaghan over the weekend, that if players were allowed to travel collectively in buses, would things be different? And obviously that's pie in the sky, and we our condolences and hearts go out to the family there, because that was absolutely terrible. But like, it's tough for those players in a very different sort of a, I mean, it's such a tiny thing compared to the tragedy in Monaghan. But like, if you're gonna, players put their lives on hold for this sort of stuff. So if we can just take it for what it is tough on players to miss this, because we're not sure when Dublin will get back to one. Will they this season? Will they get back into an All-Ireland semi-final this year? It's hard to know.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to echo your condolences for the Duffy family up in Monaghan, and just really, really tragic circumstances, and fair play to the Monaghan footballers for doing what they did on Saturday in the worst of circumstances. Just what you're saying about the Dubs, I can't imagine what it was like for Cian O'Callaghan, Ronan Hayes, Oisin O'Rourke and Fergal Whiteley to be, probably, feeling 100% and to be not able to take part. I that would literally be my worst nightmare. Like I've often had nightmares of missing a game for some silly reason and having to watch on, but there's actually nothing physically wrong with you and you could actually play, but you just can't. I always had this recurring dream of where I'm tying my boots in the dressing room, but the ball is thrown in and the game is on. I just can't get to the pitch. It's probably something symbolic of something that's going to happen in my life, or something that has happened. But I can't imagine what those guys were going through. The emotions. It's just. You feel absolutely helpless and totally useless. And it's an awful situation to go through.
Yeah, the bearded pirate, a sin bin is too much of a game changer in hurling, especially for that length of time. It doesn't make as big of a difference in football. We'll move on here. Hefo 67, Tipperary were superb in the first half, but I think the psychological blow of losing the lead left them rattled. Hence, misplaced passes, slips, poor decision making. Limerick smelled blood and they feasted. They certainly did. So look, let's just have a look at some of the positives for Kilkenny in this game, because we've talked a little bit about the misfortune of Dublin and the fact that I thought they performed very creditably, even up against those circumstances. So going through the Kilkenny team, Adrian Mullen got a couple of points from the get-go, started well. So did John Donnelly. Martin Keown did fine, got a few points. Billy Ryan, I'm sure, would be very disappointed with his performance. But I think it's a bit like some of the younger players, like James Bergen. He had a rough day out in the league against Wexford, but he's coming again. And I think Billy Ryan can probably do that too. He's got a lot of the raw materials that you need. Owen Cody scored just a point. So in a lot of ways, you'd say that's job done as a defender. But he did win some very, very good ball and kept it moving for Kilkenny, put them on the front foot, won a few frees as well. So he's franked his form.
I'd say, Shane, Owen Cody, this has not been disingenuous to him, but Owen Cody has done what I thought Billy Ryan might do. He has stepped up. He's the the ally to TJ there up front now. He's causing defenses trouble. He's causing them to focus more attention on him. I thought he was brilliant. As you say, we've talked about before, you look at the scoreboard, look at the scoreline, and you think, oh, he didn't do much. And that's just how unrealistic, I suppose, just having that view is. I thought he was absolutely brilliant. And they have so many more options in attack now. Mullen really looked back to himself. Like if he'd scored Everton he hit the other day, he would end up with 5 or 6 and would have been probably man of the match. So I thought he was brilliant. As well. James Bergen coming in, getting 2 points. There was a passage of play in the second half where Mossy Keown gets a block down in the corner. Can't remember who it was on, but about 30 seconds later he puts the ball over the bar, and it just summed up everything that's good about Kilkenny and everything that's consistent about Kilkenny. That kind of ravenous work rate, honesty of a kind of endeavour, and do you think, are they All-Ireland contenders now? They're 2 wins away from winning the All-Ireland. They're kind of not talked about maybe in that same light because we don't think maybe the quality is there, but they continue to get the job done.
I mean, let's be honest, the quality of the Munster final was sky high compared with the Leinster final. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Would Kilkenny's performance against Wexford or Dublin been good enough to keep with Limerick?
No, probably not, no.
So by virtue of no, Kilkenny could win an All-Ireland semi-final. The likes of Tipperary are on there, will probably end up on their side because I'm pretty sure Tipperary can't meet Limerick in an All-Ireland semi-final. Obviously, Tipperary might get knocked out earlier. But anyway, look, the point is they could meet the likes of a Tipperary, could meet the likes of, they could meet Galway, I suppose, because they haven't played already in the Championship. Could meet Waterford, Cork, Clare. There's some of those games where you instinctively fancy Kilkenny. There's some of those games where you might be like, I'm not sure if that'll suit them. But if you're just going to say, Limerick are going to have to be beaten to win an All-Ireland. And yes, the Cats beat them 2 years ago. But I don't think there will ever be a bigger revenge mission for Limerick than playing Kilkenny in an All-Ireland final. And I couldn't see how Kilkenny would beat them.
It'd be the perfect way for Limerick to do back-to-back and avenge basically the one really significant defeat of the previous, 3 to 4 years. But
do you know what it'd be like? It'd be like when Clare in 1997 went back to winning All-Ireland. They'd won it in 95 and they hadn't beaten all the traditional counties along the way. But then back in 1997, they did it and they beat Cork, Tip and Kilkenny en route to winning All-Ireland.
No longer the Whipping Boys, that one, yeah.
Yeah, and that was it. Like, the conversation is over. You've kind of put yourself on top and there's no more questions about it. If Limerick do that, it's the one thing that's always just kind of there being sort of held over them. Yeah, but you didn't beat Kilkenny in that game. So, it'd be interesting to see. I have to say, I think there are still slight midfield issues for Kilkenny. The two players were taken off, Richie Reid and Richie Leahy, and it's an area we've talked about before. You could argue that both of those lads are being restyled as midfielders, and maybe they don't naturally play in those positions. Others would argue in a different direction. TJ Reid, point from play, still obviously sets stuff up, brilliant on the freeze. Is his form, is he a little bit up and down at the moment? And is this something that you'd expect of a 33-year-old player? I mean, Seamus Callanan, you could see him, he was very, very tired towards the end of the game. He hasn't had a full pre-season, of course, so I think that has to be taken into consideration. Patrick Horgan had a quiet game a few weeks ago. Joe Canning also was poor against Dublin. So it's tough on the older players, but TJ Reid, is the same threat still there? Or do you think he's just changing his game now as he's older?
Yeah, I think he's changing his game a good bit too. Like, even he went inside for a good while. He was probably inside for too long. And like, this thing of like, just put him in the edge of the square, that's fine. Like, but the ball going in still has to be good. Like, despite him having this, crazily good paw in the air. And when he drifted out the pitch and picked up even some of some Dublin puckouts even from Alan Nolan. He was in around the breaks. I think maybe his role is probably evolving and changing a bit more. And maybe that's because they feel that other lads can step up now and contribute in the scoreboard. But how positive is it for them that he didn't shoot the lights out again and they won a Leinster final, convincingly? That can only be good. That can only be good for Kilkenny this year, but it can only be good for Kilkenny over the coming years and whenever he does step aside, because at least those guys have kind of gone and done it when maybe he wasn't up at the usual 8 or 9 out of 10 that he would be.
Yeah. So there's questions then. What do you think of Kerry's head-high tackle in that match? So that was like in NFL terms, American football, where you sort of hit someone with the crown of the helmet, as they always refer to it as, like the helmet lowering rule. He did come in heavy, and it was helmet on helmet between Michael Carey and Cian Boland, and it was the force of it too. I don't believe that his intention was to come in and smash Cian Boland's helmet, but Boland had to go off the last day against Galway with a knock to the head. Not ideal as well. He had to come off here. I do think that was a crucial one. Like, that could have been a red. It could have been.
It was a bizarre tackle, really. It was you mentioned kind of earlier, it was really raw, a really, really raw tackle. I think it would have been harsh to give it a red. Because, as you say, I don't think there was intent, but it was a definite yellow at least. Really have to give kudos to the Dublin doctor and physio that went on. Cian Boland wanted to stay on initially straight after, and it would have been a really, really bad look for hurling if, the doctor is saying he needs to come off and Boland is saying he wants to stay on. At least they took him off and were able to do a bit of further assessment, and he was able to come back on. And I thought that was really, I think that is what we need in the GA. We don't need to be we don't need to be just letting the players say, "Oh, I'm grand, I'll stay on." At least the medical opinion was given there, the expert opinion, and fair enough, he was able to come back on a minute later. But I thought that was important. I don't think it was a red. I don't think it was a red, but it was definitely very, very clumsy and raw kind of tackle.
Yeah, I suppose when, like Will says here, even when TJ isn't scoring, he's fetching ball and setting other lads up. That is true. If you do a tackle on a person and it is a foul and it means that the other person has to go off injured, I mean, then it does kind of pose the question, should you not also have to leave the fray if what you've done going outside of the rules has kind of ended someone else's involvement?
Yeah, I know where you're coming from. If you're... I think a lot of it is whether, what's your intent?
Intention,
yeah. What is your intent? Are you intending to get a lad out of the game? If you are, then maybe that kind of needs to be looked at. But I don't think there's any intent on Kerry's from Kerry's point of view. But I do think that's an interesting question that probably does need to be asked.
Yeah. So just back to that question then about Dublin. We know if Clare were to win their match, Tip will play the winners of Waterford and Galway. So could Dublin beat Clare? I don't see any reason why not, but it needs all those lads back. And I mean, we don't know the situation with Owen O'Donnell. There wasn't too much information coming out about that afterwards. But if his hamstring isn't right, and after less than just 3 minutes, you'd be leaning towards thinking it wouldn't be right. That's a huge problem because then Aaron Shanahan will feel like, geez, I have a right chance of going to town here.
Aaron Shanahan or Tony Kelly, like he's going to, if he's fully fit, he will quench the the influence of one of the opposition's best players. Like I tell you what, they performed with a lot of credit in the circumstances, but I just think no more than the Kildare footballers getting through to the Leinster final and probably missing Kevin Feely and Owen Doyle now. You're getting there, and there's a lot of good things going on. But Mark Schutte probably going to be out. Owen O'Donnell, be amazed if he's not out. Like he mightn't have done much harm, but he definitely hasn't done any good to his hamstring anyway. And those four guys coming back into the panel only days before the match. I wouldn't be writing them off, but there's definitely plenty of things in the minus column going against them.
Yeah. Look, I kind of agree with you there. I mean, there's more in some of those players too. That's the thing. Look, Kilkenny were completely full value for the win. They were excellent. I'd say Brian Cody will be thinking a little bit like I'd say he'd nearly like to have seen his team up against a full strength Dublin because the Wexford game was such a brilliant test, and he learned so much about his panel. Obviously, Michael Verney's just dropped off the line there. I'm sure he'll be back in a second. But they learned an awful lot about their panel. Did they learn quite as much in this game? Hard to know. And I think from a Dublin point of view, they'll know there's probably more in a few of these players. Rian McBride didn't get into it the way he might normally do. Keane Boland having to go off injured, that was a bit of a blow. Didn't get enough ball to him. Ronan Hayes not being there was massive. Keane O'Sullivan, he's a really good forward. Seen him a lot with St. Bridget's over the last few years. A couple of times the ball came into him. And what he did brilliantly was he got out in front of his man and he was showing for it. And the ball was being delivered to him. But for whatever reason it was, he just wasn't getting it up into his hand. He was spilling the ball. He was dropping it. And I think there's more in him. So there's more in Dublin overall. But we'll see how that goes when they get to the All-Ireland qualifier stage. Michael, we'll move on to the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship qualifier from the weekend. Saturday, we obviously had Laois and Waterford. First of all, we'll go to Clare against Wexford. Clare 225, Wexford 222. And, this is a game where Clare were 110 to 3 points ahead by the 20th minute. And somehow nearly left it behind them.
Yeah, it's like if you were a manager, you'd be whatever Brian Lohan is able to bottle in that first quarter. Every manager in the country wants it. Like Jesus, like very few teams. Like if you go back through his games, particularly championship games, started unreal well against Limerick last year. Started savage against Wexford last year. They probably maybe didn't start that well against Waterford with Tony Kelly getting injured. They were started brilliant against Waterford, started brilliant against Tip, started brilliant against Wexford. They're able to put teams on the back foot straight away. I don't know if it's something they're doing in the warm-up, or maybe at the weekend it's something they're not doing in the warm-up and just keeping lads fresh and not doing too much. A big bugbear, Shane, on a hot day like that is the manager who thinks he needs to do a half an hour warm-up and then lads are goosed with 10 or 15 minutes to go just because there's no energy in the legs because they've expended too much in the warm-up. But whatever they're doing, they're starting so quick. Then on the flip side of it, they're not finishing games nearly as well as they're starting them. And, they obviously finished okay against Tip, but, weren't able to get as close as they would have liked. They finished very, very badly against Waterford and didn't finish great the other day and left Wexford in with a chance. Like, you didn't think Wexford were going to win it, but they still had plenty of chances at the end. So, but I genuinely think Clare are, a really, really dangerous prospect going into the qualifiers. You're looking at some of the wides that they hit. You're looking at the Waterford game. You're looking at this game here as well against Wexford on Saturday, and you're thinking, like, if things click or they take another second on the ball, or the wide count goes down to 8 or 9, they're going to have a serious chance against most opposition.
Yeah, look, I think Clare are an improving side, and Brian Lohan has kind of circled the wagons, and the players are really responding to them. And Shane O'Donnell has been out injured, and I don't think there's much talk of him coming back in the short term, which is a massive kind of thing because he's such a quality forward. I thought they were full value for their win over Wexford. Aaron Shanahan, certainly a free, if not a penalty. Like, that situation where he turned his man, and this was late in the game, he won a free, and then it went back for the first foul. But Matt O'Hanlon had pulled across his head with his hurley. And look, as a defender, that's what you're going to do. You're going to try and stop him some way. He was going to bat the ball. So that was probably the most likely way of getting a hook in. But it was a free, and it probably should have. Like, I'm thinking, why not a penalty there? You've played the advantage. Surely the advantage is to then give a penalty for another foul rather than going back for the original one.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you on that. Yeah, definitely. I think, like, I don't see why that wasn't a penalty. He must have been really scratching his head after that. Well, he definitely was. He was scratching his head, but he wasn't scratching it wondering. He was scratching his head after feeling the knock that Matt O'Hanlon hit across him. But yeah, it's very hard to get your head around how that wasn't a penalty. Again, I think a penalty would have been fine there. I don't necessarily like the sin bin. I wouldn't have been altogether that happy with it. But I just think, again, going back to the sin bin penalty debate, a penalty is enough of a punishment there. That definitely should have been a penalty.
Yeah, looking at some of the players who did the scoring for Clare in this game, Diarmuid Ryan, again, very good at the backs, scored a point. Thought Rory Hayes was excellent. He's just a player who's going from strength to strength. Going back to that Desi Hutchinson performance last year, Hutchinson got some scores, but Hayes won a lot of ball against the head when they were under pressure. Cathal Malone scored 1-1, had some bad wides actually as well. David Reid scored 3. Ryan Taylor, we keep talking about him, scored 3. Shanahan with a couple, and one of those points was brilliant. Touched the ball down out by the sideline and threw her over the lat. Aidan McCarthy, he scored 3. One thing I'd point out, and like I don't want people to start jumping on my back over this, but there was an element of some of the players and their scoring. They're very comfortable on one side. Not that they're one-sided, but not quite as comfortable on the other side. I think Cathal Malone, he had 3 bad wides in a row on his right-hand side. And a couple of other players, like Aaron Shanahan, definitely favours his left. There are a couple of players, and maybe this is the difference between the very, very top-level teams and the teams that are trying to make that breakthrough, that sometimes that little thing just is getting in the way. Is that unfair?
And not something I thought too much about, but if you look at Malone, he obviously got the goal off his left going through. He scored plenty off his right, so I'm not sure, but they're definitely
brilliant players. Like, these are all really good players now, just in case people start taking a fit of the vapours.
They're definitely rushing. Like, Ryan Taylor got a chance in the first half at one stage, and he got the ball, and he was in about 40 yards of space, and he struck it straight away and put it wide. There might just be a bit of coolness needed there as well. But as I said, if they're able to level it up and get up near 70%, taking their scoring chances, they're really dangerous. I don't think there's too many teams that we want to play them. Obviously, Cork are playing them next, and difficult enough game to call that too. But Clare are coming in, like, in fairness to Loan, he's really, as you say, he's really circled the wagons there. They kind of seem to have a cause. They definitely had a cause at the weekend, given who they were playing. And they're dangerous prospect.
Yeah. So let's have a little look at some of the fallout from this game. I just bring something up on screen here. So Paul Galvin talked about Davey Fitzgerald. Obviously, Davey Fitzgerald was talking about some of the disgust and abuse that his family received. Obviously, his father Pat is the secretary and has been there with the county for a long time. Davey, there's been a lot of talk about Cahir Lohan. There's been a lot of talk about the facilities, the county board, what Brian Lohan is up against, and obviously Davey Fitz, former manager, and it's just one big. It's all a little bit tasty there at the moment, and he was asked about it afterwards. But then Paul Galvin, who was the Wexford football manager for a while, he had his comments, and he goes, Davey Fitz, well, obviously this was about Davey Fitz saying it was an absolute disgrace the way his family had been treated. Davey Fitz loves to play the victim when it suits him. He's far from victim in how he behaves behind scenes while fronting to the media, and I can personally attest to that. Hope someone in the media has the guts to ask him the hard questions now. Always the victim, never your fault, David. What did you make of that when you saw that?
I was kind of rubbing my hands together because it's great material for us anyway. I can tell you that. There's obviously Paul Galvin, and he talked in the Irish Examiner podcast a few weeks ago with Paul Rouse. He clearly has not just one axe to grind, but several axes.
They got beef.
Yeah. But he certainly has, a lot of axes to grind with Davy. Getting the two of them in a room for a sit-down interview or something to be interesting. But I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, the only thing I'd say about Davy is as well, like, Davy's answering questions that we're asking. He's not, bringing this stuff up voluntarily. And some people who think, I remember a year or two ago, me and you did something talking about Dan Shanahan's reaction to Morris being dropped. And the only reason he talked about it was because I asked him. He wasn't going to volunteer the information. So, like, Davy has obviously been pushed on some of these things, and he's going to answer the questions when he's asked, even though recently he hasn't answered a lot of those questions. So, listen, it's an interesting one. Is it the best course of action for Paul Galvin or anybody else just to be taking a pop at someone, in the immediate aftermath of a defeat? I'm not so sure. I don't think that's the bravest thing to do.
But the point then, is there a case of playing the victim? And, Davey Fitz is well able to stand up on his own 2 feet. He's regularly got a platform to speak, and he kind of does after matches, or, he's done some media events and that type of stuff, and he's asked about this. But, there is a case that, you obviously have to be a very strong character to lead a dressing room, and he's obviously gone through his ups and downs over the years and talked about bullying as a child. But that doesn't give, free rein to just say, well, look, this is disgusting, and, like, if social media abuse has gone out there, yeah, that's fine. That should absolutely not be happening. And he's dead right to say that. But then, that doesn't just mean that we can't just look at what's gone on at your end of the things too. There has been suspensions for different things that this manager has done over the last few years. He's had plenty of fairly heavy comments about people over the years. He had a column with the Star, for example, for a while in between stints of being managers at different counties. This is a person who's well able to kind of stand up on their own 2 feet and give his own opinion about things. And when you put yourself in the public spotlight that often, as you have done for a number of years, then people are going to make comments. I mean, and that's kind of the long and short of it. So, I mean, he's well able to be a strong character when it suits him. So you have to be able to take it too.
100%, yeah, and I think that there has to be people.
And I don't mean the abuse, obviously, but you have to be able to take it when people come back at you.
No, I agree with you, yeah. And like Davey obviously would have been very, very, very vocal towards referees over the years. Like sure, when he talks about abuse that he's got, the referees would question some of the abuse that he has given them and their officials over the years. But I think it's an interesting one, Shane. There's a difference between accusations and on slandering people and trolling people and asking questions. You're allowed to ask questions about what's gone on. Why is this happening? And I think sometimes questions are often misplaced as accusations, or you're having a go or whatever. You're allowed to ask a question about why isn't Carlow up to the standards that it should be, or why is Pat Fitzgerald in this role as long as he is when he's retired or whatever. He's past retirement age. People are allowed to ask those questions, and I don't think they should be just deemed as accusations. They're general questions that people want to know the answers to. Yeah, absolutely, and I think deserve to. Clare. Look at even the minor situation during the week, losing by 40 points, and the fact that the under-16 season hadn't been carried out the year before. These are questions that do deserve answers to. And when GAA means everything to people, and in parishes and clubs all around the country, GAA means everything. And if people feel that things could be done different, they're dead right. I mean, just because you have a role in a county board or a club board or whatever, that doesn't mean that you deserve to have that forevermore. And just because one thing went right, that doesn't mean 100 other things are going wrong. But I do want to talk about his record with Wexford over the last number of years. So in 2019, in the round robin, they beat Carlow, and they had, I think, 2 or 3 draws. And they got into, probably 3 draws, got into the Leinster final, beat Kilkenny. That was their only 2 wins in that season. Last year, had 2 games against Galway and Clare, lost them both by combined 22 points.
drew with Kilkenny this year, lost after extra time, and lost well after extra time, and also brought back on players who'd already gone off with cramp rather than using panellists. I think that would definitely have caused a bit of sourness with those players that weren't used. I think there would have been question marks in the dressing room. That's just the kind of human angle of it. Generally, people just talk about the star players only, and we don't really have that conversation. But then they have this game here, and to go 1-10 to 3 points behind, but nearly pull it back. They obviously are playing for their manager. I don't think you can say that they're not playing for him. But, I mean, the record over the last number of years, they've had one win over a team that's currently residing in the All-Ireland series, in the Liam McCarthy level, in the last 3 seasons. I mean, that's just not good enough, and you can't ignore it and act like that's grand. Like, I mean, sorry, they beat Laois this year as well. They put up 5-31. But Laois aren't an All-Ireland challenger. Obviously, they've done very well in their games since. But their record is, a lot of his wins are against teams that you'd be shocked if they didn't beat.
Yeah, they've been very, very competitive against a lot of the bigger teams, but they haven't got probably those big results. Like, as you said, take that Kilkenny result out of it in 19 and even in 17, and they haven't been able to beat. They haven't been able to beat any other big hitters, and that's fair comment. If that's deemed as an accusation or whatever, then there's something seriously off. That's just a statement of fact. You do have to wonder whether it's the end of the line for him in Wexford. It's obviously his 5th year. It had been talked as been his last year. I don't know whether it will be, but there was stages.
Apparently, he told the players during the week leading up to the game that he was staying on. That's the rumour that I've heard from a few places. Yeah. By the way, I've had a couple of people message me, both with text and also here on YouTube from Will. Verney is wrong there. There was no question asked about the Clare situation. He moved from a Wexford-related answer to talking about Clare County Board, Lohan, etc. And obviously,
that's a fair point. Then, if he volunteers the information, there's a potential there that's trying to change the narrative.
Yeah. So I mean, the record the last number of years just hasn't been good enough. It really hasn't. I mean, some of the wins, with all due respect, wins over the likes of Offaly, Carlow, Laois, Westmeath, obviously beating Dublin and Kilkenny, those are definitely teams that are regularly challenging, or at least we're putting them up in the conversation, getting to provincial deciders, winning, provincial titles, that sort of stuff. But even going back to his record with Clare as well, in the 5 years there, 60% of his championship wins came in 2013. And the form was never franked by another strong season. So, when you're up there so often and people are analysing what you're doing and the results aren't really they're just not quite there. It's I'm not really sure if the support is going to be there locally for him to stay on for another season. I think a certain amount of the players would definitely want him. I think players who aren't getting their game or are being brought on, they're always probably happy to see a change, no matter who the manager is. So that's nothing to do with Davy. But I think players who are outside the team, and then anyone who's a little bit upset with the decision making, there's probably some people there who are looking at the team and saying, there's no Owler Tabala lad, there's no lad from, there's a couple of the main, sort of big clubs. I think it's the first time since the 40s. I'm just trying to figure it out here.
Sean Murphy, in fairness, was injured coming. He would have been playing if he hadn't been injured.
It was the first time since 1939 that there was no Owlers, Rathnure and Ali player. I mean, that was the thing that going around on WhatsApp. I haven't actually gone and checked if that is the exact stat. But anyway, that's what
I think, Shane, just an interesting one would be, and I'd love to get, Wexford opinions, and maybe you've got them already, just the way that they played in the first half. They didn't have a man inside the 45 at different stages. Carl Dunbar put over a point underneath the stand, and it was the only option he had. There was no one inside to hit the ball to, and it's just very, very strange. And I just would question the direction in which they're going at times in games.
Yeah, there was a good comment here from Grania Foley. She goes, we hand pass and solo when we don't need to, often in short puck out, give away the ball, leads to scores and make us look like fools. I always end up shouting, just hit the ball. System is robotic and forced. We had an extra defender and still conceded 13 scores in 15 minutes. And she also added in, I'm not anti-Davey Fitz at all. He's an honorary Wexford man at this stage. He has done wonders for Wexford hurling. Would be happy for him to stay, provided he changes our style and adapts to different situations, making the same mistakes over and over, and it drives me around. Even Hennessy, it's just a system of play. Some years it's effective, other years it's not. Happens in all sports that the game changes and systems and formation just change and evolve. Hurling Chat has added, well, it's good enough to only beat Laois in the last 2 years of championship. Is there any need to say more? And there's plenty of other comments in here. Bizarre deliveries high into corner forward, says the centre forward. Don't get the Rory O'Connor thing either. John Walsh, I'm a huge fan of that style of play, but Cody must like it. Look at the first half of the Dublin game. Kilkenny may as well be wearing purple and gold. So the point is, you and I have kind of talked about it plenty of times. What are they trying to do with the ball? And they're obviously trying to work it out from the back. But at times, and Sean Flynn, you can check his Twitter out, was even showing it, how the wing forwards were getting so far up the field, and like they were still working the ball out short, and they didn't really seem to have fully. I'm sure they have worked on it, but they certainly didn't have a coherent way of getting it out to their players, where you're also being very conscious of taking care of the ball. And their wing forwards were gone so up the field, and if the two guys who were sitting back, whether it was Kevin Foley, Liam Ryan, or other players, then their options were narrowed, because it looked to me like sometimes the wing backs, they'd already run into the traffic. The inside forwards had come out to the traffic as well. And then you're wondering, like you're talking about with that Cathal Dunbar score, where can he actually hit it here? Where's the release ball? If a short hand pass isn't on, where is the release ball? I just wonder, is it overcomplicating? And like Davey would say, we've 4 or 5 different plans and going on. But like,
I think you're trying to be too smart at times, Shane, aren't you? Like, you're just trying. You're overcomplicating what it's a simple enough game at times, and I just think they were overcomplicating it. And you know, it's grand having 4 or 5 different systems or whatever, but sometimes you have to wonder, is it a bit much? And I don't mind the way they play, or far from it, but has it evolved? It's evolved a bit from 17 to 19, and particularly with Kevin Foley going in.
You have to have someone in the square. I mean, there's times you look up, there's no one in the square. I mean, what game are we playing here?
Well, Shane, Limerick or Tip got 2 goals yesterday because they put the ball into that area. If Wexford don't put that ball into the area and have a couple of bodies there, you're not going to get the scores really. And they were still in the game. I think that was more to do with Clare's inefficiency in front of the post than anything Wexford really produced. But yeah, you would just wonder. There always has to be an out ball. At least Conor McDonald was nearly always that out ball over the last couple of years. But a lot of the time, there just wasn't anyone on the edge of the square or anyone in assisting him in the full forward end. There was just no options out the field, and they were lucky that Clare let them back into the game, because had they not, it could have been a fair shellacking.
You'd have to say for Clare, the fact that they put up 225 and won this game without Tony Kelly scoring from play says a lot about where they're going.
Definitely, like that. The more than Kilkenny winning with TJ maybe been below par as regards scores on the board. You have other lads like Cathal Malone chipping in. Like, I do think Cathal Malone is one of the most underrated players in the game. He's so effective and physically just an absolute monster. If he's able to straighten up in front of the post a bit, I definitely think he could, be one of their leading lights. Dave McInerney came on, got a great flick on Lee Chin, who probably should have pulled the trigger a bit earlier, or probably put the ball over the bar. But him coming back in, he's probably going to come in instead of Paddy Fitzpatrick the next day. And if O'Donnell can come into the equation, it is another option off the bench. But quietly and effectively, they've built over the last year to 18 months, and they have a good, real solid 15 with a serious work ethic. And they have a couple of subs that can come in now. Gary Cooney came in the other day. Mark Rogers came in. Cooney came in and got a goal. Rogers came in and got a point. Anyone that was writing off Clare, you could be left with egg in their face over the next couple of weeks, because they have a chance of going further than most people expected.
And John S. lads, I don't enjoy going to Wexford matches anymore. Seeing balls bouncing wide when players are outside the 45, we are a terrible side to watch. Do you think Davy should stay on?
If I was him, I wouldn't stay on. Last year they had a point to prove, obviously coming back this year to try to right some wrongs. Like this year, yeah, fair enough. They should have beaten Kilkenny. They didn't beat Kilkenny. They were in the Clare game, but never really looked like winning it. So, unless he's coming back next year and the whole thing is totally evolving, I'm not so sure. I think probably now would be the time to step away. But again, from a Wexford point of view, who's coming in as manager? Unless change is a good change and it's going to bring things forward a bit more, that would be the only reason you would change. If they're going to regress, or they're going to get someone who's maybe not up to Davy's level to manage a side, or they don't know who's going to manage the side, then I wouldn't be changing. But if I was Davy personally, I'd probably be walking away.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he's done probably a lot of good. He's won the first Leinster title in 15 years. That can never be taken away on him. Like, Wexford people will always appreciate that. But it does feel like for a couple of years now, I mean, just think about in totality the last couple of seasons. I already mentioned the not using the subs the last day, or going back to players who were already cramped the last day out against Kilkenny. Last year after the Galway game, talking about how the players put up the white flag, and then obviously he retracted that later on. But all of those kind of things added up together, you just wonder at what stage is there a case of just staying in a place too long. And when things are going badly in your own, let's say your own hometown, it can get poisonous enough. But you are from that hometown, and whatever about us giving out about him, we'll make sure no one else gives out about him from anywhere else, because he's one of our own. But if you're from an outsider and you're going into another county or club and you do really well, that's all brilliant, and everyone thinks it's great. We brought someone in, he doesn't have any loyalties to any family or whatever. It worked perfectly. But then if things turn and you outstay your welcome, or you don't play as well, or you don't manage as well, or whatever, I think it can turn a little bit quicker that people are going against you, and some of the locals will no longer have that time for you. And people come out an awful lot quicker to take you down, because they're like, well, I'm not going to fall out with anyone locally. He's going to be gone eventually. It's easier to take a shot here. So I think, given the results over the past couple of years, I think now might be the time. But, he's his own man, and I'm sure he'll make his own decision. Shall we jump on to Laois's brilliant performance against Waterford? Waterford came through eventually 3-23 to 2-21 at Nolan Park, but a brilliant performance from Laois. At one stage in the game, it looked like Waterford were going to coast. They were 116-11 ahead at half time. But a couple of goals from the brilliant Paddy Purcell and substitute Kieran Comfort, that put Laois ahead just going into that water break in the second half. And the shock was on. Liam Cahill said his side had one of these great GA lines, a big job of work to do from this point. But he did also add, I mentioned a lot, our own errors invite teams on us. And they certainly do. They've had a rocky start to the season.
They definitely have had a rocky start. I was going back to that kind of defeat of Tipperary in the league, and even the defeat of Limerick in the league. And I really, really fancied them going into that Clare game. Obviously had injuries and that, but they just didn't perform up to the levels that we're accustomed to from last year. And they're still not there, and they're quite a bit off. They obviously got Jamie Barron back on the pitch, which was huge. But the likes of Stephen Bennett, Desi Hutchinson was good the other day, but maybe not what he was at maybe last year. Jack Fagan the same. They just aren't performing at that level. Someone said to me the other day, I think I said Waterford aren't at. I tweeted Waterford aren't at the levels of 2020, and someone said did someone from Waterford kill my goldfish? Far from it. I had great time for Waterford, but they're not playing anywhere near the levels they were playing last year. The energy is there, but it's just not as slick as it was last year. And I would have some worries for them going in the next day. Now I definitely would have some worries about them. They don't have that. They haven't produced it in championship yet. They've played 140 minutes of championship, and they've been below par for the vast majority of it. In fairness to Austin Gleeson at various stages the other day, and in particular down the stretch when they were under serious pressure, he was one of the ones that stood up.
He's in all-star form in a team that's in relegation form. And they've had their injury issues, we get that. And maybe there's a point that this is a game where you just have to get through. You're expected to win it, and it's all about getting your name into the hat. But what a job Ozzie Gleeson is doing to be just thrown back into the forwards after being wing back against Clare. Played really well there, scored 4 from play, if I remember correctly. He went up into the forwards here, and I just double-check what he scored here. He got a couple of points. One of those was... I can't remember who exactly it was, but he was solo and through, rocked into a man, and then just straight away, just quick flick of the wrist or the bar from about 50 yards out. And I just wonder, how many other players would you do this with, where you have them wing back one week, full forward the next week, and expect them to always produce? It's one of the high balls he caught in the second half. I think it led to a goal late on, probably the one for Patrick Kern. Was sensational stuff. So
you wouldn't be able to do it. There's little or no other players in the country that you'd be able to do that with, and it's phenomenal what he's doing. I think Shane, from a Laois point of view, you do have to credit them the other day. They were absolutely brilliant, and I did smell the shock. I smelt the shock with with 5 minutes to go, and they just weren't. In fairness, Waterford up to the gear probably, even though Waterford hit a couple of wides in the closing spell. But PJ Scully put over a line ball near the end, and you're just thinking like this is on, but they just weren't able to create those chances. Patrick Purcell absolutely outstanding again. Just
he's
brilliant.
an all-star nominee as far as I'm concerned.
No, without a doubt, and did loads of brilliant performances. Pádraig Delaney came back in there and was really, really good again. They've turned it around phenomenally since that Wexford game where they showed very, very little and conceded the puckouts and were basically annihilated. We're talking about turnarounds as season turnarounds go. They don't get much bigger or better than that for Laois. Again, for the second year in a row, they were very, very close to taking out someone in the qualifiers.
So Galway next up for Waterford. Two teams that are actually in fairly rotten form if you're to go in their recent outings. Galway, of course,
first meeting
to
since the 17 final as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so like when your entire season is at stake there are a couple of young guns being thrown in by Liam Cahill at the moment. I mean, he obviously had them in there last year too, but Shane Bennett back at wing back, Ian Daly's in there, and Neil Montgomery getting his chance, of course, again. Kevin Moore did come in and scored 1-1, obviously a deflected goal for one of them. But I think there is plenty to like about this Waterford team. Jack Prendergast, we've talked about him a lot. Desi Hutchinson scored 3 points. So there's plenty to like about them, but it just doesn't feel like they're rolling fully at the moment. But they got over the line there. And a word about Laois. I mean, Cheddar said, we could have won the game. I'm not interested in moral victories. I'm interested in finding out how we're going to improve ourselves against these teams, learning and developing that and turning over some of these teams. And you know what? We have to say fair play to them in the way they've developed through this season, because one of the things we talked about was, are they physically in the same shape as some of the better teams? Well, they fairly rocked Antrim in that relegation clash last week, and they came out here and were able to put it up to Waterford. Now, they were terrible against Wexford, and maybe some of their tactics of sitting off and just allowing the puck out, and then Wexford just walked up the field and knocked it over the bar. Maybe the occasion got to them, whatever it was, hard to know. But they've certainly put a lot of wrongs right in the week since.
They definitely have, and now they're coming into this Division 1 relegation playoff against Westmeath in the form that they'd want to be coming into that game in, and really, really interesting. They're coming up against the Westmeath side who are coming in with a ball of momentum as well, having won the Joe McDonagh, and it's a huge game for both. Like Westmeath were able to win the McDonagh and kind of keep Kerry at arm's length, partly due to the fact that they've been exposed to much better teams throughout the league. So staying in Division 1 is huge for the two of them. Like, it would be an awful bubble burst for Laois, having, really put it up to Waterford and beating Antrim to end up back down in Division 2A again.
So we'll jump onto the Joe McDonagh final over the weekend. I was there on Saturday at Croke Park to see Westmeath beat Kerry 228 to 124. So that's Westmeath up to the Liam McCarthy next season. They're back into the Leinster Championship, and obviously winning that title. It was the third time in 4 years that they'd been there. They'd lost the two previous ones. They win it this time. With Antrim going down next year, it's going to be very tough. And a lot of people, I think even some of the analysis over the weekend, people were talking as if Offaly had already won the Christian Cup. It hasn't actually happened yet. But I think it was even one of the managers afterwards talked about Westmeath or that Offaly were going to be in there in the Joe McDonagh next season. But Westmeath just had too many scoring threats across the field as far as I saw from the get-go in this game. Niall O'Brien scored a couple, one of those from play. Niall Mitchell scored 1-4. He was brilliant. And the goal he got at the start of the game, he caught a lovely diagonal ball and then he turned and ran. And people talked about Kyle Hayes using the underside of his hurley or the toe facing down as he blasted into net. Niall Mitchell actually did the same thing. Now, he didn't go low. He blasted it into the roof and net, but that was brilliant. Kieran Doyle scored 1-3. His goal came after Dara Egerton won a brilliant ball in front of Shane Conway, the danger man that we always talked about. Egerton had the man-marking job there, especially in the first half when Conway was inside, and he did a brilliant job. Insofar as can be done. Conway still set up a few scoring chances, but only got a point from play throughout the course of the game. But he did brilliantly, and Kieran Doyle finished that brilliant. And it kind of set the tone for the game that you knew that they were always going to be held at arm's length. 5 points from Davy Glennon, he was brilliant. Robbie Greville with 4, Inks Clark with 2 from wing back. It was a superb performance in the Division 1A campaign where they got beaten from pillar to post most days. It probably stood to them.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, yeah. In fairness to Davy Glennon as well. I'm friends with Tommy Doyle on Facebook, and he had he had a story up last night with Joe Dolan singing the Westmeath Bachelor and a picture of Davy Glennon's head in. So he's obviously been taken in very well in Westmeath. That's a unique kind of double as well, to win Joe McDonagh, or to win All Ireland, then win Joe McDonagh within the space of 4 years. And Noah Larkin, who was a coach with Galway in 2017, has done the same. So yeah, fair play to him. And he came back from a kind of a serious injury too. Fair play to Westmeath. And just obviously the Joe McDonagh relegation final will obviously get a lot less exposure, but massive win for Meath, beating Kildare. Jack Regan hit 17 points. I don't think he hit a wide. It was 13 frees, 4 from play, and not one wide. He was absolutely outstanding. Big setback for David Herrity's Kildare side, going back to Christy Ring, having won that last year, to beat Down in the final last year. And now all of a sudden Down are still up in Joe McDonagh, and Kildare have gone back down. So the structures, I'd have to question a small bit there, because how are you going to improve if you're going up and down? I do think Kildare are a side that are going to improve an awful lot over the next couple of years and will be there or thereabouts. And just some of the other fixtures in the lower tiers as well. Christy Ring Cup quarter final, absolute belter of a game. Sligo and Roscommon. Sligo 218, Roscommon 120. Sligo played Derry in the semi-final now. And I believe Roscommon did not win a game in league or championship in football and hurling this year. So as 2021 goes, doesn't get much worse than that for them. Down the Nicky Racker quarter final, Armagh 725. Leitrim 121. Danny McGee scored 5 goals. That's under 10 or under 12 stuff. You don't think you're going to get 5 goals at inter-county level. They booked their place in the semi-finals. And then in the last game, the Lorimar Cup quarter-final, Fermanagh 3-15, Monaghan 4-6. I believe it was fairly tight the whole way, but 1-1 from Keelan Mooney. Where was it? Just in the last quarter, kind of set up for Fermanagh. So they set up their semi-finals place. But some weekend of hurling. Jesus Christ. Long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have to head away now. You have an egg boiling. So look, we'll chat to you again. And just a reminder to everyone else, we're brought to you by orgaretro.com. Go use the promo code OurGame and you'll get 15% off class jerseys like this Wexford one. There's a whole array of them there. And if you want to get the audio podcast, go to patreon.com/OurGame. It's just a £5 amount to support the channel. Thanks very much, Michael.
Cheers, Shane. Good man.